I've been following Ramit's work for over 12 years now, and in this video, I'm going to break down 14 proven lessons from Ramit's podcast strategy in a way that you can borrow elements from for your own goals. Ramit's an excellent example of somebody who has been creating for over 20 years now. I Will Teach You to Be Rich started out as a blog in his dorm room. And now his podcast has helped him get to Netflix and sold out stages all over the country. And I want to highlight some of the things that Ramit and his team have done really, really well. This is, of course, my outside view and analysis, by the way. I have not gotten to speak with Ramit about any of this. I just think him and his show are worth studying. So let's dive in. I'm Misbah Haque, by the way. In 2016, I started my very first podcast from my childhood bedroom with no audience or credibility. Within a year, I landed my dream internship, landed my dream job in the Bay Area, and went on to produce my next podcast, which would go on to do over 1 million downloads. In 2020, I founded Pod Mahal as a way to help others build a body of work through podcasting. We offer consulting to help you own your means of production, or done-for-you plans where all you have to do is show up and record. I also host my own podcast, Habit Chess, where I'm testing and executing all of these strategies in real time. So the number one lesson is to double down on you. Ramit is significant to study because remember, his blog, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, started out when he was in college in his dorm room. Who would have thought back then that he would be on Netflix? When you see someone cross over into mainstream audiences like he has, it's important to study their early beginnings because there were many years where he didn't have anything close to that. But the lesson is that he chose to talk about something that he could see himself doing for a long time to come. How he talks about personal finance may have evolved, but why would he spend 20 years of his life talking about something if he didn't care about it even a tiny bit? I think he's a masterclass for personal branding for people in the education space. What you choose to talk about is worth being intentional and honest about because you have the opportunity to choose something that you'd be excited to talk about for the next 10 to 20 years in some way. So why go for anything else if it doesn't matter that much or it won't stand the test of time in your books? Ramit is a legend of the internet because he has used his internet capital to expand into mainstream audiences. And if you're a fan of his, you've probably followed along like I have, and you're happy to watch this happen for him. You're excited to have been a fan and to get to see the person you're rooting for really, really take off, especially because we have the context of some of his earlier days and how he did all of this by really just being himself. The second lesson is to make it mean something. And what I mean by this is that Ramit started off talking about this stuff when he was in college and he had created a name that he himself admitted sounded spammy, right? I will teach you to be rich. How does that sound coming from somebody who's in college or who's in their early 20s? It wasn't even the subject that he actually studied at Stanford, right? I think he studied psychology. And it's also become kind of a running joke where when you recommend I Will Teach You to Be Rich or Ramit Sethi's books to some of your friends, you kind of give them the heads up like, hey, I know the name sounds kind of spammy, but it's not. Trust me, he's legit. Despite this, Ramit stuck to his name, stuck to his mission of helping other people find and live their rich life. I'm sure it was super uncomfortable at times, or there was self-doubt in certain moments. And now look, after his book, after Netflix, I Will Teach You to Be Rich does not have the same spammy vibe to the name. And this is the power of branding. Ramit has made IWT mean something over 20 plus years. You can practice this on a smaller level like Ramit does too. For example, he creates names and frameworks for some of the same concepts that have been around forever, right? So instead of hidden fees, he'll say phantom costs. Instead of a budget, he'll say conscious spending plan. What it does is it allows you to take these traditional frameworks and kind of fix it or personalize it to what you want it to actually mean. This allows him to add or fix the traditional framework into something that's a little more aligned with what he believes. Either way, make it mean something because that's how it's been done with almost every brand that you admire. The third lesson is that credibility compounds. Ramit's brand has been around for over 20 years now. He's been able to document results from thousands and thousands of happy customers from his digital products. And he also has the validation of making mainstream appearances, like writing an article for Forbes or being on the Tim Ferriss show or appearing on news networks from time to time. Writing a best-selling book is something that he did well before the Netflix opportunity. What's interesting is that he's appeared on all the big podcasts years before ever starting his own. Taking advantage of being a guest on podcasts is actually a great thing to look into if you want to be a part of the world, but you don't want to go through all the effort of starting your own. It's a way to begin compounding credibility, even if the podcasts that you're on are not that big of shows. Notice the theme of how Ramit's podcast actually positions him as an expert without any hard sell, purely from the fact that he is talking to couples about their money. The fourth lesson is talking about the funnel to Netflix. Ramit's podcast was out for a while before the Netflix show came out. The series on Netflix was obviously way higher production value because he went to actually go visit couples, and he followed along with the stories of a select few couples. But what this did was create a funnel that worked both ways. So if you consume the stories on the Netflix series, you had the podcast to go binge if you wanted more stories in a similar format. But let's say that you discovered through the podcast. Now, if you wanted something higher production value, or you still need to earn more trust from Ramit, you're going to go to the Netflix show and, binge the series. So it works both ways very beautifully. If somebody wants one style, they will likely appreciate the format that's offered on the other one. But the bigger funnel is likely the fact that there's hundreds of thousands of people that are discovering Ramit now for the first time through the Netflix show. Right? Similar to Suits. That show was really popular. I watched it when it was on the USA channel, but millions of people didn't know about it until it came to Netflix. And then it had this resurgence where they came back and did a new season. So having the podcast is a very smart thing to do because it allows all of the attention that's naturally coming from the Netflix show to be captured somewhere. And of course, there's digital products, there's email, freebies, there's all sorts of other things that Ramit offers, which you can dabble with. His podcast is a place where you can get more of what you saw on the Netflix show, but in a slightly different format. We should briefly discuss what likely helped get the Netflix show. And I've heard this from the comedy world, right? So when comedians get Netflix specials, one of the things that Netflix looks for is the fact that can they sell 2,000 tickets in every major city in the United States? And that number almost guarantees this level of, mainstream validation that the talent already has, right? So if a comedian can garner up that much attention already in 50 states, you've got enough of a viewership that you can guarantee where from Netflix side, it goes, okay, yeah, let's take the risk, versus just being like, well, yeah, this person's good. Let's take them and give them an audience, right? Give them our audience. I'm sure that's not the only consideration, but I think that this distribution ability gets Netflix to pay attention. This is where comedians were able to sell out their own live shows and build their followings with YouTube and with podcasts and basically force Netflix to pay attention to them. You've got Andrew Schultz, Theo Vaughn, Shane Gillis, Big J Okerson. The list just goes on and on. In Ramit's case, the podcast could have been proof of concept for the Netflix show, or maybe the Netflix show came first and it was validated as proof of concept, and then it was like, oh, let's set up the pod to make sure that we get to do more of this and to make sure that we capture all the attention that comes from Netflix. Either way, it's super impressive, and I hope he reveals more insider baseball around how that worked. The fifth lesson is leverage for deals. Ramit's already begun to mention the pre-order for his upcoming book called Money for Couples. The podcast in this case serves as a proof of concept along with the Netflix show to the publishers, because major publishers want to know that people want to read this thing and that you can sell this thing. Ramit's grown each channel to a place where it's basically undeniable when you stack them together. So you've got the best-selling book, okay? Then you've got the top-ranking podcast. You have the Netflix show. You have the email list size. You have a large customer database. The sixth lesson is Cornerstone content. Ramit's podcast has become a pillar piece of content for him and his strategy. If you go to Instagram and check out, some of the clips, you'll see several clips per week that come directly from the podcast. If you keep an eye out for his emails, you'll see the CSP breakdowns, which stems from the pod. If you get a live notification where Ramit is coming to your city for a book tour, the format is basically inspired out of the pod. It's just the live version. If you look at his YouTube channel, the pod is a pillar piece for the format that he's putting out. Even the topics that he discusses that aren't directly from the podcast, I bet you are conversations that were inspired from the show in some way. Or it may have came from the dozens and dozens of submissions that he now gets for people to want to be on his show and get that one-on-one coaching from him, or for people to be submitting their CSPs and getting the breakdown, getting a chance to get the breakdown in their email. Ramit's podcast has helped expand his content ecosystem in a way that feels more like him. You can probably see how no matter where, how you find his stuff first, the podcast plays a crucial role in building trust with you, even if it's you just knowing that it exists. The 7th lesson is more impressions, same message. And this is something that I really admire about Ramit over the years, is that he'll have similar courses, similar sales emails, similar messaging, right? He leans into a lot of the same concepts. If you ever listen to a podcast where he's on as a guest, listen to the way that he talks about some of the same concepts. And one of the things you quickly realize is that he's really optimizing for reaching new people, because the people that already know him, like maybe me and you, already like him and trust him, and we're getting nurtured in his email, right? But for the new people that he's trying to reach, this totally makes sense, because a lot of his products are digital products. And when you have digital products, sure, that part's passive. You don't need to be constantly tweaking the products, right? But what that means is you need to be now putting all that energy into getting more impressions, more people to know about your stuff, more people to know about who you are. So the lesson here is don't be afraid to repeat yourself, because a lot of these messages and things that you're thinking about, you repeat it in your head and in your mind and on your pages way more often than other people do. So you think, oh man, I've said it once, it's going to be overkill if I say the same thing again, or if I tie it in again in this different way. But Ramit's a perfect example of how when you are going for more impressions, more people to just know who you are and be aware of what you do, that's the point of creating the best way to phrase it, right? The best way to package up some of these concepts so that, okay, now we can take this and we can keep just introducing it to more people instead of just constantly changing the concepts to make it something new. The 8th lesson is end screens. And this is a more tactical takeaway, but I think it's worth noting because it's something that Ramit did from very early on. Like when he did not even have the video version of the podcast, he was still using this technique. So anytime there would be a clip that would be put up, there's 3 to 5 seconds at the very end of it that basically Ramit comes down and tells you, hey, if you like this, go check out more on Spotify, go subscribe and review on Apple, right? That call to action to the show is huge, because even if people don't actually make the crossover, what they're becoming aware of is the fact that, oh, this is a thing. The pod is even a thing. And that association takes some time to form. So I started noticing that he did this with even his YouTube video. So if a clip came from a YouTube video, right, not from the pod, and it was a solo clip of him or something, at the end of that YouTube video, you've got an end screen that's pushing people to the channel. The reason I think this is worth doing is because it doesn't take that much work to design it once, design it up front, and then save maybe a portrait orientation, a landscape orientation, a square orientation if you want it. And then you can easily plug this in at the end of each clip that you edit. And again, even if people don't take the action and go to YouTube or Spotify or Apple, if they make it all the way to the end, they're at least becoming known of the fact that you even have a podcast. And the repetition effect of seeing this over and over and over, if somebody consumes several clips in a row, is the fact that now there's just a higher likelihood that they'll go consume your podcast, or that they will even, see you as a podcaster. The 9th lesson is format. So Ramit Sethi knows every single big podcaster that you can think of. He's even been on the top shows like the Diary of a CEO, the Tim Ferriss show, all of these different outlets where it would have been pretty easy for him to hack the game and kind of rise to the top charts very, very quickly by doing so. But he didn't do that. Yet he chose to feature everyday couples that were open to talking about their finances on each episode. This kept the focus on his ideal customer instead of chasing prestige. He's able to showcase a variety of situations and stories of couples already navigating these sticky situations. It's a more interesting vehicle for teaching the same personal finance lessons, but through another vantage point, right? Especially in a sector like personal finance where many might consider it saturated. Since he had a very established list and business and was around for such a long time already, it wasn't hard for him to find couples that were willing to be a part of the show or willing to even submit their numbers in a chance to get it, critiqued and reviewed. And I wanted to acknowledge that because I know that that's a problem when you are a new show with no audience or credibility, is you don't have anybody yet who's submitting questions to you, even when you put them out there, right? But the reason I think it's worth mentioning is that the Q&A format is a version of this, right? Where not every episode has to be, with your target customer, but doing Q&As over time and striving for that in the long run, when your show is able to do that, especially as it builds a little bit of an audience, beginning to kind of do a Q&A format or segment can be really, really valuable because it feels like the community is now building and involved, right? You feel kind of a part of it when you are listening to these couple stories through them. The 10th lesson is user-generated content. Shortly after he released the podcast, you began to see newsletters and emails that he was sending out, which contained these very same conscious spending plans, a breakdown of a story of a couple that, you didn't get to see their face or anything, but you got to see their submission, similar to the pod. And then again, you go on to Instagram and, you see a couple screenshots and breakdowns of CSPs as well. The sharing of, I'm sure, the initial episodes invited more people to submit their stories and a chance to be a part of the show in some way. And what happens with this is it created a format that could be repurposed across almost every single platform that they're on if they wanted to, and also change up the format just slightly so it doesn't feel exactly the same. These are new stories, right? The stories that you'll read in your email of the CSPs are different than the ones that you'll see and hear on the podcast. It also makes content ideas very easy because your listeners are giving you things that they want to know, things they want to talk about in a way with language that would appeal to more people like them. The 11th lesson is progression in production. The reason I think this is important to highlight is because Ramit did not start with full-blown audio, video, clips, YouTube, everything at once. When his show first started, it was audio only. It was on Apple and it was on Spotify, maybe even just Apple, right? And then what he did was he began releasing clips that were teasing the video version. So the video version wasn't even fully available yet on YouTube, right? But what he would do is release a few clips here and there of them. And guess what? Those clips weren't anything crazy. The camera was still kind of blurry, whatever Ramit was using. It looked like, a bad Zoom connection sometimes with 720p quality, right? But that didn't matter, okay? We didn't really care. And I think that actually set a great expectation for anybody who was consuming the show, is they're not expecting 4K webcams from these everyday couples that are joining, right? They're in it for the meat of the content. So keep that in mind if you're stuck between an audio only show and a video podcast, because there is a very big gap sometimes. You can take the hybrid approach of where you record the video, but you don't release it. And what you can do then is control very specifically the 10-second, 30-second snippets that you do want to release and you are open to sharing. But what it does is it gives you a lot more control of the final product without a lot more of the work that you need to get the full video version up. And then, of course, when you think about his live events for the book tour and how they're recording the pod, that is a whole nother animal, right? The production quality there is just next level. He's partnered with like Live Nation and things like that to actually, sell out a lot of these big theaters and places that he's going to. And so, you've got varying levels of production quality. And then the very next week after a live event, you'll see a clip that was, filmed on Zoom and just feels kind of like a more intimate setting. So I personally think that the Zoom format is the best because it allows these everyday people to be more themselves, right? You're not being observed by a crowd of hundreds or thousands of people in which you may not give the exact same answers. You may, be more honest, less honest. I don't know. But I feel like there's this intimate feel that the Zoom style that he does captures very well. The 12th lesson is data collection. This ties back to the concept of credibility, because if you are getting data over and over, week after week, from couples who are revealing their biggest pain points, their numbers, their issues, their dreams to you about their financial situation, you're sitting on a lot of valuable data. And you do not have to be selling this to third parties and, branding the crap out of it in order for it to be something that's useful to you. I think something that often goes underlooked is the fact that just by you repeating this process and talking to more couples gives the vibe of credibility, right? So for example, if you've talked to over 100 couples, eventually what you'll be on someone else's show and they'll go, wow, so you've talked to over 100 couples now. What do you think is the one thing that is the deciding factor of if their financial future will be good or not, right? It sets the theme for all of these questions that could be asked about some of the insights collected from speaking to these 100 people. Now, it's important to note that you don't need to be collecting sensitive information in order to apply this concept. So for me, this is something that in my fitness coaching days would happen, right? I worked with tons of gym owners. And so what would eventually happen is gym owners would ask me what I saw was working well with other gym owners, right? I personally wasn't a gym owner, by the way, right? But because I got to oversee people in New York here, people in Japan, people all over the world. And this gym owner was like, okay, this person must know some things that are working well or that are not. I want access to them, right? And so another example of this is David Senra, host of the Founders Podcast. He has read over 350 or 400 biographies now. And his whole show concept is that he reads a biography of a founder and talks about it and shares his notes on it, right? And so people now look to him and go, oh, well, you are probably one of the best people to ask about writing a biography, writing structure and things like that, because you've read so many. You've read over 350. What are some of the things that stand out in well-written biographies, right? So just by you repeating volume of something, there's a little bit of credibility that begins to kind of follow you by you just doing that act. So remember, you pick up on trends, you synthesizing them to specific people can be extremely valuable. So remember, from being around a lot of these people, you're going to pick up on trends. And to specific people, you synthesizing that data is going to be very valuable. The 13th lesson is access. When you consume Ramit Sethi's work, whether it's his emails, his blog, his YouTube, Instagram, what this does over time is you may want to ask him a specific question. You may want to know his thoughts on a specific scenario, or you might just want to be more in his orbit. So he's recently launched his money coaching program for couples, which is kind of a community group type thing, right? Where I'm sure you get access to Ramit's calls or his breakdowns, a couple times a month or whatever it might be. But if you are not a part of that group, you do not get access to him unless you consume one of the following things: by reading his book, listening to his podcast, consuming his social content, reading his emails, buying his digital products, or watching his YouTube videos. Out of all these, though, the podcast invites a style of talking that would be closest to how you would normally talk in a conversational situation. The way you film social content or even a YouTube video might change up the way you talk slightly. But when Ramit's talking to someone, in a similar situation to you, right, in a coaching styled format, you might very well feel like you got this secondhand coaching for free. It's acknowledging that parasocial relationships are powerful. And when your talk time is limited, content gives more people access to you and your information. The 14th lesson is to build in the freebie. The freebies you offer are important because it gets you access to the email. All of Ramit's courses are sold through email. Also on his website now as well, but back in the day, you could only sign up for his courses maybe 2 or 3 times a year when you would get the email that, the course was open for enrollment. There's multiple freebies that Ramit has had over the years to get you to come onto his email list. The one that I want to dive into in particular is the CSP, or the Conscious Spending Plan. Since this is a core concept that he talks about with each couple on the podcast, it makes your brain go, I wonder what my numbers are, right? I wonder what it'd be like if I filled this out for myself. Thankfully, Ramit has made an Excel sheet which you can download and personalize to yourself. When you build in freebies on this level, there's an endless amount of email subscribers that you get without any hard sell, without any hard call to action. You'll also notice how Ramit's team has actually personalized the landing pages to each platform. So if you click onto the Conscious Spending Plan from the podcast show notes or description, you can see in the URL after campaign, it says show notes. Versus if you click on the same Conscious Spending Plan link from the YouTube videos in the description, you will see it says YouTube after campaign. And this applies for all the different freebies, I'm sure. And also if you go out and you Google the Conscious Spending Plan, right? What this does is it allows Ramit and his team to be able to track the data of where all the clicks are actually coming from. Imagine how valuable it is if you can track every single click that is coming from your podcast and from your YouTube, right? And they're different. You know where it's coming from, which one's converting better. That is fascinating data that you can have. So anyways, I hope these lessons and these breakdowns were useful for you. I hope there were some takeaways that you can, incubate on for the next little while. But if you are in the process of starting or growing your own podcast, make sure to check out some of the links that I have for you in the description below. Free tools, paid tools. I try to keep it up to date and keep it useful. And of course, if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. Make sure to drop a comment below. But thanks so much for hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.